This is the Lightning Junkies podcast with your host, Chaz Cryptoson. On this electrifying episode of the podcast, we have Shinobi telling us why Lightning sucks and why no one should use it. Trolling titles aside, I think you're really gonna like this episode. This is part 1 of 2 of my Skeptical of Lightning series. I feel like it's very important to be intellectually honest about the things that I believe in and I fight for, and I definitely feel like heavily paying attention to the flaws and arguments against Lightning is very useful. I noticed at the Lightning conference this was a very common thing amongst the people there as well. In this episode, I ask Shinobi about different arguments against Lightning, some arguments in favor of Lightning, and we even get into the topic of Lightning Network darknet markets. Before we jump into the episode, I just want to give a quick reminder about my crowdfunding campaign meant to keep this podcast alive. You can find that at crowdfund.lightningjunkies.net. Check the show notes for other ways to support the podcast, including tipping.me, BottlePay, LNCast. As well, soon I should have my WooCommerce store online, so you can purchase my stickers on there in order to support the podcast as well. Insert a bad pun about lightning strikes here, and let's go ahead and jump into this episode. I would like to go ahead and welcome Shinobi to the Lightning Junkies podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me, Chaz. I'm actually really excited that you got this started because, there was nothing out there that's just Lightning.
That was pretty much the reason why I wanted to jump into this at all. I had gotten my microphone last year, sat around for another 12 months thinking, what the hell should I do with this damn thing? And then I realized, hey, I really like Lightning. I'm the only asshole that seems to, well, not the only asshole, but one of the few assholes out here that, could just throw up a podcast really fast, have a lot of time. So why not do it?
I mean, that's how everything gets started, I believe, at the beginning.
All right. I'm probably most familiar with you by your Twitter account. I was telling you before we started recording, I've listened to like maybe one full episode of Block Digest, so I don't know too much about you. Do you want to give a bit of a non-Bitcoin background or a pre-Bitcoin background so maybe listeners can have a general idea of where you're coming from here?
I was a wage cuck that found Bitcoin, did all right with that, and started teaching himself everything that I could about it all. I mean, it's really the meat of it.
So how did you find Bitcoin? It's like, when was the moment, and how did it bring you over to the dark side here?
Well, I first saw something about it in 2011 with the Slashdot article and immediately went, this is the most idiotic thing I've ever heard of in my entire life, and dismissed it. And then a buddy of mine actually brought it back up again in 2013 around the time we were flying up to the 1100 top with Mount Gox. And, I started looking more into it like, oh, that's alive and worth money. And, just kind of fell into the rabbit hole from there.
Got it. What did the rabbit hole for you end up looking like? For me, I jumped into mining, trading, all that good stuff. What did yours look like?
From the outside, like I'm not gonna lie, it was just, wow, I have a chance to make a fuck ton of money here. So I just started buying into it. I think around 800 was where I first started, and then the whole way down to the bottom. And I literally around there pretty much just went on Reddit, found a random guy, bought a bunch of Antminer S1s because the place I was living had electricity included in the bill. Did not use an escrow. Thankfully, did not get ripped off, and hit fiat and Bitcoin denominated ROI on the S1s and let them run a little while longer. And that's pretty much the only reason I'm still here. Like I literally had a drunken night where I was completely shit-faced and swept all my paper wallets to Circle and was about to sell right at the bottom. And at the last minute, just changed my mind and said, fuck it, and dumped my whole bank account into Bitcoin and then pulled everything out again. And Like that, if that was literally one binary choice, there's no way I would be in this space to the degree I am if I had made the other choice.
Interesting. I wonder how many other people were sitting there at the bottom thinking like very similar things. So, were you kind of, what was your thought process there? Were you thinking that this thing is a piece of shit and is not going anywhere?
I wasn't really thinking beyond my money and
Got
the
it.
investment. Like that's like I got the way the technology worked in the sense that somebody rambling about blockchain gets the technology, but I was just thinking the fucking money. Like I lost a quarter of my money, barely like scraped it all back in fiat terms mining, and then it was just like is this gonna drop again and I'm just gonna fuck myself when I have a chance to get my money out.
Does this kind of mindset pop up anymore, or are you kind of pretty much inside of Bitcoin and not coming back out in again?
I'm definitely not leaving this space. Like this to me is the seed of the next American Revolution. Like this, like people love to say Bitcoin is not a political thing. I think that's the most naive statement in the world. Like the technology itself may be or politically neutral, but all technology is. But the what it will do is absolutely political.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think it's kind of absurd to think it's not a tool of political upheaval or something like that. You kind of had this low point where you almost sold, you did some mining. Do you think that you kind of focus less on the price and less on the money portion going forward, or has it stayed kind of primarily about the money portion?
You always have to consider your bills and keeping a roof over your head and shit. But
Sure.
like I am absolutely just like down a rabbit hole thinking about how the technology will play out, how the politics will play out, like all day. Like it's like a normal psychologist who is a no coiner would look at me and say that I have an insanely unhealthy obsessive behavior.
Right. You might even call yourself a junkie, as it were. Haha.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so we'll kind of come back to Bitcoin and kind of do a deeper dive on that, I think. But I was curious to know if you've had much time to play around with Lightning very much.
I mean, I've not really tinkered around with running a full or a routing node or anything, but I've used all of the mobile wallets pretty regularly. I think there's a long way to go there, but I think things have come a very long way. Like it's compared to when it first went live. Like I was having failure to routes all the time. Like it's a rare occurrence now. Like just the experience is something you can viscerally tell has materially improved since the outset.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. There was someone on Twitter that was creating some FUD, and it was like they had found a picture from the Lightning conference where they were selling beers for 400 sats, saying, you know what, you guys only priced them this low just so you could ensure that routing would go through, citing an article from the Block from June of last year. It seems a bit absurd to think that routing hasn't improved in like 18 months or 16 months or something. Along those same lines, do you think there's any real challenges that Lightning kind of faces kind of in the short term in your eyes?
Yeah, I mean a bunch. Like routing is going to be a big problem until we actually start introducing new channel constructs, like in terms of like different types of pre-signed transaction formats. So that's absolutely something that's going to be a big issue, especially another kind of connected issue is receiving money. Like that's going to be a very complicated thing until this advances much more beyond the kind of basic design that exists now in implementations, because it's like you're effectively talking about a credit relationship. And I mean, people might go now, oh, it's easy to get a inbound capacity. Yeah, but we're effectively still in the this is a toy phase. Like none of the people routing or doing any of these things are making money or doing it to make money. It's because we're all testing things. Like these businesses who are starting to launch things, I guarantee you that the ones that are profitable, and most probably aren't, are not making a lot off of it. They're just being forward thinking. Like when that liquidity is something that's get like people really compete for, it's not going to be that easy to get a channel to receive money. Like it's going to be like a credit rating. Like people actually compete for the limited liquidity there. And so that's a big factor going forward. And I think really the only way to solve that is payment processors that batch and then settle things on chain.
Got it. So you were kind of telling me that you listened to my podcast from last week with Ruben. And one of the themes in that particular podcast was how after transaction fees raise, that a lot of these kind of smaller or kind of less intelligent business things that are happening in the space will kind of just evaporate. One that I might point out would be the Breeze wallet, how they open inbound liquidity to all of their users, 1 million sats apiece. And that's obviously not scalable and things like that. But do you think it'll kind of, hit other businesses in the kind of similar way where it'll just make it just unfeasible to do a lot of things that we kind of enjoy now, similar to how Bitcoin underwent that kind of change in 2013 to 2015?
Yeah, absolutely. Breeze, I think, like, just to be blunt, like, I think that's an idiotic model. And I think it should have been obvious it was idiotic from the very beginning. And, there's also the aspect of they front load the channel. So, like, depending on how that gets done, that there are some potential issues there. But like beyond Breeze, it's just like all of this, like, bit refills, turbo channels. Like, is that going to make economic sense when fees start going up? I don't think so. And there's ways they could take something like that and rebuild it with a different architecture to keep working. But like the current implementation, like that goes out the window when fees go up. Like the premium fee for that would be crazy.
All right. Kind of moving in a little bit further into this, because I think at the top of this episode, I'll let it be clear that this is the Skeptical of Lightning episode part 1 of 2. I'm going to be doing another one next week.
Dude, I actually, to interject real quick, I love the title that's set up on Zencaster right now for this. I think you should stick with that.
We'll see. It's like it's a little trolly, but maybe I should go with that. The reason that I wanted to bring you on in particular is that I remember maybe 6 months ago, maybe less, that you were, kind of raging at people that were, complimenting Lightning, and that people are going to use it to trade between exchanges and it's going to be better than Liquid and all these things and get around all the issues like magic, and that just enraged you. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the most absurd thing in the world. Like, it's people not thinking through the liquidity dynamics. Like, as long as the Lightning Network is just two-party bidirectional channels, and that's the only type of channel that people can make, like, that idea is crazy. It's like, having a channel to an exchange to like top up a Lightning wallet you use to spend from regularly, like that type of stuff makes perfect sense. But traders using Lightning to interact with the exchange for deposits and withdrawals at scale, that's insane.
So do you think there's anything that can be done to kind of address that point, or is it just kind of intrinsic to how the system works that it's just not feasible?
Until we start seeing things like channel factories, maybe, and state chains entering the picture, like, no, it's impossible. It's the liquidity. And like, this is why, like, I lost my shit so hard on this, because like nobody is actually thinking this through. When you have a trade, you have one side that loses money and the other side gets money. So if all your money on both sides is locked up into a channel, then that's not in the winning side's custody. You have to actually move that on chain to that and splice it into the winning trader's channel. And trading is a very high time preference thing. So most people want their money now. They want it in their control now. And you lose all of the benefits that exchanges are slowly realizing by batching withdrawals, through this, because you can't, like, batching works because they condense all the deposits into a small number of UTXOs, and that's what they process withdrawals from. You can't do that when you have a very high time preference, like have to splice these in and out of one channel situation. There's no condensing, there's no reducing the amount of inputs involved there. So you completely undo all the efficiencies exchanges have developed in dealing with the main chain, create a whole bunch of new inefficiencies, and then tie them to a very high time preference activity that's going to incentivize spamming the hell out of the chain to do this all the time. Like, it's insane.
Do you think it's likely in a possible future where Lightning is very popular that this is true, that the base chain of Bitcoin is basically all Lightning opened and closed transactions? That's kind of sounded like what you were saying at the end there.
In the long term, yeah, but the problem here is, like, this has the potential, if all the exchanges start doing this, to just eat up all the chain space. Like not just Lightning in general, like it's just all of these traders splicing in and out of channels because they won or lost trades, and the exchanges having to do this like regularly because they want control of their money now. Like it's the exchanges eating up the commons of the chain.
Do you think that there's any other kind of claims that people make kind of in the, I love Lightning and it can do everything, that you just want to correct as well here?
I am completely in agreement with Tage Dryja that it, like, micropayments are nonsensical in the long term on Lightning. I mean, like, think about it. A payment for a thousandth of a cent, it takes just as much data as a payment for $10 to route. And so eventually you get to a point where, like, the scaling costs and loads to really process massive amounts of microtransactions like that, like for the amount of money that it makes them, like that's not going to make sense as a routing node to process that in the long term. And if you try to correct it by actually paying enough to make it worth it, then like you're retarded. You're paying way higher than the actual value of the payment to get the payment where it's going. So like that in the long term is just out the window. Like I understand trying to like build transitory things or things now, but thinking that's going to remain viable on Lightning in the long term, I think, is delusional.
Do you think long term that there's no micropayments on Bitcoin or Lightning? Do they happen on a theoretical layer 3, or do they just not happen on Bitcoin or its related things at all?
I think people just use things like Xiaomi and eCash servers for that. I mean, they're custodial, but they're completely private. And like, do you really give a shit that there's some counterparty risk on $3 you have for tipping people online?
Fair enough. I think we went into some kind of arguments there against Lightning, but I still kind of maybe want to go even deeper. Is there a way to steelman the anti-Lightning network argument? Do you think there's any other good arguments against Lightning kind of in the future?
Really, from my point of view, no. But if you assume the point of view that Lightning is only ever going to involve two-party bidirectional channels, and you're not accounting for the potential to create new, different types of channels that can involve different amounts of participants or do different new things, I can see why you would like make the kind of arguments, because assuming that, yeah, routing would tend to centralize. It would become really inefficient with liquidity, but they're ignoring the fact that we're going to have things like channel factories, like state chains, like who knows what other types of payment channel structures people will come up with in the long term.
We've definitely talked about state chains multiple times here and channel factories and things like that. How likely do you think we are to get those kind of technologies anytime in the future? Is this like a long-term thing, do you think?
Based on the requirements on the base chain, yeah, but assuming we get Schnorr and Taproot and then Sig hash no input, like they're gonna happen. I mean, why wouldn't they?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I guess I'm somewhat nervous about Schnorr and Taproot and all of them being similar to the SegWit thing. Obviously, it's not going to be because it doesn't have the block size thing attached to it. But I'm just worried that some nonsense is going to pop up and slow it down significantly. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not worried about that at all. Like if you really look around, like the composition of the market is really changing. I mean, like 5 years ago, the idea that Fidelity, one of the biggest asset managers in the world, would be this deeply involved with Bitcoin would be like you'd be laughed at. But it's true now. And not only is that true, they actually understand what they're doing and how this works and how to make this technology work for them. So like I'm not really worried about that kind of nonsense anymore. I think that the types of investors that will really drive this market will do their homework.
Essentially, what you're saying is a lot of the bigger names in the space are going to end up being more into the Bitcoin ethos than we might naively think.
I'm saying that like when it comes to stuff like that, nothing matters except what does the money want? What do the market participants want? Who can gobble up coins on the side they want if a split were to happen, and who can dump the shit out of the other side? Like, and ultimately, big money is what is going to move these markets. And people like Fidelity, people like the people at Backed, they actually understand this shit. They understand why so much of the shitcoin promises are nonsense. They understand the actual potential of something smartly designed like Bitcoin. So I'm not really that worried about that stuff at this point.
All right, so let me digress slightly here. So during your jumping into Bitcoin, the rabbit hole, all that, did you ever really get into shitcoins at all? Was it ever like a momentary fascination or anything?
Maybe for a little bit, I was interested in some tweaks with consensus mechanisms and other weird stuff, but ultimately is just either stuff like that is broken, or like the aspects of it that aren't like you can like hitch into or build on top of Bitcoin in some better way. So it was, after that is mostly just thank you for extra Bitcoin.
Would you say that there's any features of any coins out there that you just generally find interesting that if you could wave a magic wand, you would put it inside of Bitcoin?
Some of the privacy technologies, I mean, like Zcash itself is a complete fucking scam. The people involved with it are some of the biggest shade balls in this ecosystem. But the general technology of zero knowledge proofs, I think, is probably one of the big long term moonshots in terms of tech that actually might, work out and provide some really valuable stuff. Some of the like the concept of smart contracts is a fascinating thing. It's just that most of the people in this space don't actually understand them. They don't understand the limitations of the Oracle requirement if they are not completely native in all inputs and outputs to whatever blockchain they're on. And the like if you look at things like Solidity and Ethereum, like it's a complete shit show. But there is the potential, if you recognize those limitations regarding things like oracles and try to think more intelligently about a language to do more complicated stuff, there's potential there. It's just you need to tone down the full retard about it.
Got it. So, is there anything that would really address the Oracle problem? Like, I'm not an expert on these sorts of things, but I think I remember like Augur being criticized for this quite a bit. That in order to decide on any vote within Augur, did person A win, did person B win? Like, an outside information has to enter, and at that point, it can be, exploited. Is that right?
Yeah, like solving the Oracle problem in terms of a completely automated trustless Oracle, it's fucking impossible. You cannot verify with a system using a blockchain things that happen outside of the blockchain that you cannot produce airtight cryptographic proofs of. Like a transfer of a coin requires a signature to the public key they're locked to. That's an incontrovertible proof. The requirement from the outside world was met. If you cannot do it to that degree, then you have to have some kind of trusted party or parties that fulfill the role of the oracle. And I think it's completely irresponsible and disingenuous to try to act like you can do that any other way. Like, that's how it works. Accept that and do what you can with it. But if you try to pretend you can have that trustless automated oracle, you are full of shit and you are a scammer.
All right, moving on from there, I suppose. Kind of wanted to hit back on Lightning again. This is going to be an all over the place episode here. So we kind of touched on some reasons, I guess, against Lightning a little bit. Do you have anything good to say about Lightning? Do you have, any upsides, good use cases, anything like that?
Yeah, I think, like, if you acknowledge its limitations and look at its upsides, it's the most amazing thing that's happened for Bitcoin since Bitcoin was created. And it's not, part of that side of my attitude about it. It's in recognizing it for what it truly is. Like, you have channels, though those channels are not just lines connecting nodes. They are pre-signed transactions under the control of a multi-sig with a defined amount of participants and a structure to enforce different outcomes. Like, you can get as flexible as your imagination can take you as far as within the confines of Bitcoin script in terms of those channel constructs, how they work, their trust models, the way that liquidity works when you try to atomically link different ones together. And I think the more different types of channel constructs that are created, the more there will be a self-reinforcing synergy between all of them, where the strengths of one different construct, it fills in the weaknesses of another. And when you start to think about it like that, like, there is an enormous amount of potential. And the more functionality that gets added at that base layer of the Bitcoin scripting system has potentially fractal improvements that can happen in terms of what types of channel constructs can you make now.
Do you want to give some examples of, what you're talking about at the end there?
Well, like, think about it. Like, right now we have the current design of Lightning channels. Like, each side has their own set of pre-signed transactions. It's asymmetrical. They have the penalty structure. Okay, that's one channel construct. Now think about channels with L2. There's a symmetrical set of transactions. Now both sides have the same two transactions. The update mechanism is not the penalty key now. It's something more general. Like, L2 can be applied to, any type of transaction format that you can make the incentives work with. It's not just limited to these two people and these penalty keys. So, like, that is a whole different channel construct. And now think about taking L2 and making a channel factory. You now have more than two participants in it. And you can stack these things by taking that first, one level with everybody in it and just extending more transactions of, like, the, smaller amounts, and eventually just put two-person, like, L2 channel transactions at the very end. So, like, that is a different channel construct. And then, like, you talked about Ruben in the last episode about state chains. I don't see state chains as its own thing. Like, I see that as just a new type of channel in the Lightning Network. And so when you think about it like that, you get a much deeper sense of the potential possibilities there.
Got it. That's a very interesting way to put it. I really like that. So, kind of given that fact, do you see there just being like the most amount of traction from the fact that we're going to have Schnorr, Taproot, TapScript, Mast, and all these things interwoven, and then with channel factories and possibly state chains on top as well? We're going to see some kind of massive scale come out of all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the two examples off the top of my head, I'm going to steal them from a talk I gave last month, and the Free States Blockchain Digital Asset Conference. That is a mouthful. So if you interject state chains into this, like, think about all the issues with routing where there's not enough liquidity. Well, now any node that trusts a particular state chain federation can just on the fly, completely off chain, create channels to route payments where there's liquidity gaps. And that can just happen like snap. Right after you find out there's a liquidity gap, it gets filled in and your payment gets routed. So like the synergy of that different channel construct with just the two-person one we have now solves a massive problem that exists with the current structure. And then another way you can use state chains is when you're looking at channel factories, there's still an issue there with size because, you know, the more people you have, the more layers of transactions hit chain in the worst case. Like the more people have to be online and active to update like lower channels in that tree. And also onboarding people is an issue because all of them have to put their input in a transaction to create the channel factory. And you know, there's even like policy and consensus rules that ultimately limit the size a transaction can be. So that poses a limit. So what happens if you start a state chain with like the total amount of money everybody wants in there, build a channel factory on top of that? You know, everybody comes into the channel factory in the state chain completely off chain, and then everybody just makes one transaction with one input and one output to close the state chain. And now everybody is in a channel factory without the having to trust the federation anymore. And all it took was that little period of trust and that one transaction with one input and one output.
So, from my naive ears, I'm getting the impression that each of these layers, in the way that you kind of laid it out, would give us, I'm not sure if exponential is necessarily accurate, but it almost sounds exponential. But do you think this really addresses a lot of the scaling, you know, I'll just call it FUD from the last couple of years? Do you think this really kind of puts that to sleep?
Yeah. I mean, this is why my attitude is like completely non-ironically, we are never raising the block size ever again. It's not happening. Like I've laughed in people's faces when they said that. And I actually want to make them smaller as, you know, these improvements and second layers get better so that we can do things like just broadcast blocks over radio if we can take it that crazy far. Because then good luck shutting Bitcoin down.
I'm kind of intrigued the idea of you know, transmitting blocks over the radio there. Okay, so I guess I've kind of avoided touching the small block thing just because I'm just like I can't even really grok these arguments. So here, please tell me why the idea of smaller blocks makes sense. I want to kind of extend your kind of argument a bit because I want to kind of hear more of the meat of that.
Well, when you take into account like the potential like insane efficiency improvements in second layers, you know, we were just talking about, you cannot broadcast blocks over radio right now. Like they're just massive. Like even a 300 kilobyte block, I think, takes something like 30 minutes to broadcast over long enough range radio frequencies. So like that doesn't cut it. Like you will never catch up to the chain. If you're mining, like you're never going to get a block into the chain. That doesn't work. So we have to like even like Luke's proposal of 300 kilobytes. If you want the Bitcoin network literally broadcasting on radio everywhere, needs to go down like, you know, another order of magnitude or two from there to actually make that possible, where miners can mine over it, people's nodes can actually stay at the tip of the chain. And, you know, think about it. If that's how Bitcoin worked, like you literally could not shut that shit down unless you just jammed the radio everywhere in the whole world. And if you tried to do that, like you cause all kinds of systemic problems for society in general. And then if you want to try and hunt people down, they can get mobile. And like, where are you going to get all the men to hunt down everybody broadcasting everything? And that doesn't get you all the people just receiving.
Okay, so before we get into that tail end portion here, I just want to be clear. How small blocks do you think we're talking about right now?
Under 100 kilobytes, probably tens of kilobytes, if we could do that.
Kind of blowing my mind right now. I guess I've never heard this particular argument before. Okay, so we're talking, 25 kilobytes here, maybe, on average or something?
Yeah, I mean, if we can be efficient enough with moving between second layers, why not?
I guess I don't have a good retort, really, but okay, so do you think you could, because maybe I'm not doing a great job here of giving you a counter argument, do you think that there's a good steelman argument against that at all? Or do you think all the cards are on the smaller block side?
Well, I mean, obviously, if like all the types of things I'm talking about with Lightning never happen, or like huge fundamental problems are found with them, or we don't get certain things forked into Bitcoin, then yeah, that argument would unravel really quickly. But assuming it doesn't go that way, like why not?
Okay, that's fair. So, but it just sounds like it kind of requires a lot in the process. So, do you wait until we get to that kind of second layer future before we would soft fork that in?
Well, I mean, it would be one of the most difficult changes ever made to Bitcoin. I'll say that right up front. And any kind of permanent fork, I would not be ready to go there until we're pretty much dead certain that like the types of exponential scalability I'm talking about are happening before actually doing a permanent fork or anything. But Luke's last kind of rabble rousing about a UASF for this had an interesting idea that you could effectively just have a temporary soft fork where it expires. And then that way, in order to make it permanent, like you would either have to take the extra step of permanently forking that in, or just kind of regularly renewing the temporary soft fork.
I'm just trying to think of, different perspectives, view this argument. We had Bitcoin Cash, we had BSV, and both of their great innovations was to raise the block size. But do you think that they're going to basically turn to zero on some timeline because the idea of using bigger blocks just does not work overall?
Oh, absolutely. Like it's just a matter of time before, like either they're just going to slowly fizzle out, or through some really shady conniving from the shade balls involved in both of those coins, they will sucker some idiot into building a big high volume thing on it, and it'll just explode. Like it's one of those two things. It's a binary outcome.
Just to be clear, do you think that there's any probability of them accidentally succeeding? Is that essentially what you're saying at the end there?
Yeah, there is zero chance of that. Like I would actually love if they were able to like find some big Silicon Valley company like Spotify that has really incompetent idiots in the IT department and actually convince them to like do this crazy store shit on BSV thing, because it would be the funniest fucking thing in the world. That company would implode, they would take that network down with them, and it would just be the best popcorn dumpster fire ever.
Let's kind of talk maybe just about shitcoins generally here. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but I'm just going to double check. Do you have a negative opinion of altcoins like Litecoin, Dogecoin, etc., like more of the slightly older altcoins?
Yeah, they're pointless like things. Like what do they exist for? Like all of their arguments for existing are nonsense memes.
Let me just steelman the possible response to that. Isn't a lot of what goes on in Bitcoin a meme as well?
Well, yeah, but hey, that's why I prefaced meme with nonsense.
Sure.
Meme is ultimately just an idea, and a lot of the ideas in Bitcoin are very solid and empirically so in a lot of their case. Whereas Litecoin is the payment coin meme. That's nonsense. That makes no logical sense if you actually deeply analyze it. And there's absolutely no empirical demonstration of that beyond small anecdotal. Like I use Litecoin to buy this stuff because I go out of my way to for ideological reasons.
Just to point out that I had tried the Litecoin Lightning Network just for lulz. Let's see how many people are on here. There was a handful of people on there. The Bitcoin Lightning Network is not large in a relative sense, but it's much more used and has a lot of people kind of using it maybe for more practical things. Would you agree with that?
If there's only like 10 or 15 nodes on the Litecoin Lightning Network, Bitcoin's is massive
Sure.
in comparison to that. Like, that's a joke.
Let's keep going with Bitcoin here because I think I'm kind of enjoying this. Do you have any kind of app, do you think, that is the 100% needed app for any particular user in the space? Or is it more of a kind of Swiss Army knife of apps that people should use to maybe address the kind of adversarial future that you're kind of talking about?
Well, I mean, honestly, like, there's no way around, like, it's a Swiss Army knife set you need at this point, because it's anybody not just doing the bare bones minimum that just kind of got set as the floor is off doing their own thing. And it's like, I hate that, because it's really like the kind of, like, to kind of connect back a little bit to like my whole rant on like what lightning really is, and looking at it in terms of like constructs for channel types. Like, if that future is to happen, we need very tight modular standards across wallets for all kinds of things. And like, it's like we're going in the exact opposite direction slowly with wallets. And it's like it's going to be like a herding cats thing, because like the whole space there, it's as decentralized as anything like that can be. Like, there is no framework for coordination or anything. It's just everybody doing their own thing, because this is Bitcoin, and that's what you do. But that doesn't get rid of the need for those tight modular standards.
So do you want to maybe kind of give me an example of what of those standards might be?
Well, I mean, for one instance, mnemonic seeds. That there's like, there's some issues with BIP 39. And then you have Electrum doing their own thing, and there's it's again, there's a little bit, not as much in a lot of other areas, but there's a little bit of fragmentation in terms of a lot of other stupid shit. You have like BitPay pushing their non-compliant version of BIP 70, causing compatibility issues. Things like formats for encoding private keys for import and things, and it's all these little niches and gaps where there's problems if a user just tries to jump from one thing to another seamlessly. And that's kind of getting worse when you start looking at, especially privacy tools in the space. And we're kind of correcting in some ways with the partially signed Bitcoin transaction standard, and like I hope that really starts catching on more. Like, things have kind of drifted a bit in terms of slowly on a course for incompatibility, and that's not a good thing.
I kind of want to take a small step back, kind of on the same point, but I remember like a long time ago, I watched a video by Andreas that laid out the kind of vision of the adversarial future where you could do all kinds of different things to like avoid government censorship, just transmitting Bitcoin transactions. I touched on a little bit with the radio transmission there. So we have things that are like Gotenna right now that somewhat address this. I also know that Rodolfo from CoinKite with his kind of privacy products, and I think he was doing shortwave radio with I can't remember who.
Oh, the lightning over radio with Elaine.
Yeah, I believe so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
really cool.
So yeah, I feel like there's a lot of these kind of cypherpunk things out there. The Blockstream satellite, all that. Do you think things are going to get more adversarial in the future? I mean, like, do you kind of see the price going up and, governments being like, oh shit, we need to take this thing down right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think they'll delude themselves by that point in thinking that they can just shut things down, but they will take advantage of the very omnipresent power they have over all of our lives to make it as difficult as possible to use Bitcoin. Like, really ratchet up the consequences for that. And that might not happen everywhere in the world, but it's absolutely going to happen in a large swath of the world. And so I think we need to be prepared for that. Like, I was just talking about it on the digest yesterday. The Loca mesh network for Lightning project in Venezuela that's trying to raise money now to sell them commercially. The the little mesh network Lightning wallets, like that, like shit like that needs to be like solid, refined, available, and just the way people use this stuff. And I mean, even in a place where you don't have that very adversarial like environment globally, it's still a nice thing to have redundant, like solid, segmented ways to use this kind of stuff, even if your government isn't, trying to stamp it out, because it's more reliable, more redundant ways to handle things. And it's I just think it's just a better way to do things if it works.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. I guess I've always kind of naturally been into the kind of more adversarial thinking because it's much more fun, to be honest. It seems like the natural way that things should go here. Can you think of any other tools that might be kind of relevant? We kind of already mentioned transaction transmission. Is there anything else to think about? I mean, I guess you also kind of mentioned seeds, but do you think there's anything else out there that's, kind of really important that the like a newbie Bitcoiner should think about and put into their toolbox?
Well, I want to say look into CoinJoin privacy tools, but I am kind of boycotting the two easiest to use ones right now.
Why is that?
Let's just say that there is way too much bias and marketing nonsense dominating the conversation between these two about issues with each other's products, and I'm just done using either of them until that shit ends. I would say like try and look into join market. I think that the GUI is a lot more solid when you just want to mix your own coins now. That's something I actually want to try and help get moving in a better direction in the near future. So it's a little more easy for people to use, because privacy is absolutely one of the most important things in this space.
Okay, let's talk about coin joins for a moment, if you don't mind. We don't need to get specific about the two things you're mentioning. Because I remember like a long time ago, before coin joins were really a thing on Bitcoin, we had tumblers and things. I'd use Silk Road, and I would use these things that weren't really anything. I think they were just things to make you feel better, sort of thing. But in kind of more recent years, we kind of actually have real coin joins and things like that. Do you think they really add a strong degree of privacy, or do people still need to keep really overall good OPSEC, keep their privacy intact?
Well, I mean, that depends on what your threat model is. Some people might not care that there's a record at Coinbase that they bought so and so much Bitcoin. They just want to hide their on-chain privacy and wouldn't care if the government was like, prove you still have that or something. But there are some people who would very much not want that record in Coinbase's database and would not comply with the government going, prove you still have these. And so you need to think about that kind of first footprint starting point. And, depending on where you're at there, just, go forward. And if, you care about privacy to the crazy degree, then, you have to take those first initial steps of not leaving records of you even buying those coins somewhere. Otherwise, that exists. And you can coin join all day. They'll still know you got those at that point and might come ask about them. So you need to think about that. And then the same kind of thing happens on the flip side. Spending Bitcoin anywhere that you ship things to you or supply any kind of identifying information to, it's the same kind of thing on the other side. Like, do you want a record existing out there that you own Bitcoin? You have to think about that. And so like really, it's those two end sides I'd say users have to really sit and think about first. And aside from that, like just mix stuff and don't ruin your coin control after mixing by condensing things again.
Do you think that there's any good ways to stay private on using a Lightning wallet, or is it even easier to be private using Lightning?
In terms of the payment, it is absolutely more private by default, but I am kind of furious at this point that Tor is not the default for all of these light wallets and even the nodes. Like you are publicly broadcasting whatever IP is associated with that device whenever you do stuff on Lightning. Your direct channel counterparties get that. Depending on how you interact with the node you're paying, get that. Like it's like that's a massive network level privacy leak. And so like that is something I'm kind of angry about, there not being a little more motivation to move towards defaults like that.
Okay, so you're saying the entire Lightning Network should just be on Tor by default?
Well, I mean, not necessarily the whole network, but there should be a default there, and start working towards, you know, a topology that has a lot of bridges between Tor to the ClearNet for that. Like if you want to run a routing node and handle your security well, like that IP is not like your home IP address or something, like that's fine. But like end users defaults should be as private as they possibly can be from the start. And like that's like something that's really been irritating me since Lightning went live.
Okay, that's a very good point then. So, besides that, do you think that there are any ways to maybe improve privacy on Lightning? Is there anything that needs to happen besides what you just mentioned, up the privacy even more?
Absolutely. Rendezvous routing needs to happen so that both endpoints of a payment do not receive any data like IP addresses or node IDs. It's just they kind of meet in the middle and then the payment completes. That would be a huge improvement. And then you know, Schnorr adapter signatures. So we can start having a breakage between that hash lock link across an entire payment route. That needs to happen because there is kind of the potential to, you know, if somebody sybiled a bunch of nodes in the network using HTLCs, like that, it's very possible that statistically they could wind up at different points in a single payment and start narrowing the probabilities of like who's involved in that payment.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, talking about Lightning a little bit, do you end up spending a lot of your Bitcoin, or do you kind of hold on to it more so kind of use it for the future?
No, I'm pretty much living off of it. I use the cash card for that. But I have found when I'm directly buying something with Bitcoin, I'm using Lightning a lot more lately. Like it's easy enough and it works well enough. It's actually starting to be accepted at a decent amount of places. So I can't remember the last time that I made a on-chain payment when I'm buying something directly with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think that I would probably have a very similar experience there. That's been true probably for about 6 months or so for me. So, do you think that's going to become a more common thing going forward?
Yeah. I think that's probably going to happen. I mean, I don't think that like it's going to be some massive thing where the Lightning Network explodes in size and everybody's using it. But I do think the people who buy things directly with Bitcoin are very much going to start moving over to Lightning instead of on chain pretty quickly.
Do you think that there's a lot of people that live that circular life now that, get paid in Bitcoin, spend everything in Bitcoin to the extent that they can, and just kind of keep that circle going to some extent?
I mean, honestly, not really. I think that's just the few of us crazies who are okay with taking what objectively should be classified as insane risks.
What are you talking about? This is perfectly sane, sir.
I think so. You know, most people would probably disagree with us.
That might be the case. All right. I guess at some point you have to kind of admit that you're an insane person if you're just living this life. How can we kind of grow that number then if we have a kind of limited number of quote unquote true converts to Bitcoin here? How do we get more on board without being shilly, or do we let them come to us?
I mean, it's really, I don't think there's anything wrong with, you know, just kind of, you know, making the case to somebody, you know, when the opportunity arises and, you know, little things like that. But it's a waste of time to really evangelize to get people to adopt it. I mean, it's just going to happen. I mean, my entire thesis on this whole thing is like the people don't matter right now in the growth phase. What actually drives markets is the amount of money. It has nothing to do with the amount of people. And we live in a world with very concentrated wealth at the top right now. It's the big money that's going to drive things. And ultimately, I think most people they can't understand this. They won't. They can't wrap their head around it. They're just going to wind up using whatever is liquid enough and scalable enough for them to use reliably. and it's the money that's going to pick that. It's not the people.
Got it. So, I mean, I guess in my experience, I stopped trying to shill Bitcoin to people when I realized they just do not care. They just kind of look at me with a blank face and be like, okay, great, Chaz, thanks for letting me know. And kind of, you had to kind of get over that point, or at least I had to get over that at some point, and just want to help Bitcoin be Bitcoin and, do what I can, have a podcast where I spread knowledge, etc. At one point, no one cared about email because they didn't understand the practical use of it. I'm sure I could imagine there being a time in the future where the same could be said for Bitcoin. What do you see as being, maybe a triggering event for that to happen?
Before I answer that real quick, I just kind of want to clarify something.
Sure.
I think like educating people who've already wound up here is absolutely something people should put their time into. I just don't think it's worth the time to try and get people. But triggering event for the transition.
Yes.
Um, honestly,
Yes.
just political instability, political and economic instability. I think everywhere that the effects of the kind of inflation driven economy we're in start really compounding, people will run to Bitcoin. I think anywhere that the political stability starts degrading to the point where you are uncertain whether your government will respect your property rights tomorrow, people will flee to Bitcoin. Like it's the need for it ultimately is what is gonna drive the normal people into it.
So let's say something like that happens and, people are drawn into Bitcoin. That seems like a kind of a moment where the federal government panics and puts some Bitcoin rule into effect. But if a large amount of people are really already into it, would that really be a serviceable thing? Or would we be kind of at another replica of the drug war or something, where it's like impossible to stomp out?
No, I don't think in the U.S. that's going to happen. I think the U.S. has far past the point where they can pull off just making this illegal. Like that's just not going to happen. Their move that they have left now is just to try to strangle it with regulation, like they're doing, like the IRS is doing with the recent tax clarification, like the continuous pushes for crazy like anal probing level KYC AML shit. Like that's the only play they have because the door is closed on the this has to be illegal. Like you're not selling that to enough people to make it happen.
So let's take a different tack here. There's the idea of people using Bitcoin, an idea that I've been kind of floating on the podcast since, I guess, basically the beginning. I kind of wrote it in the blogs that kind of turned into the podcast. So there's like Spark Swap, that there's a Zaps Olympus thing where people can kind of go from fiat to Bitcoin on Lightning. Do you think that there's a good argument to be made for people to kind of onboard directly onto Lightning and kind of skip over the base chain of Bitcoin completely?
Yeah, I mean, if your main reason for using Bitcoin is to transact with it, then yeah, like that's absolutely what they should do. And I actually I talked to Jack during an interview we did with him on the Digest last month. I think underappreciated potential there is if you can quickly onboard people to Lightning like that, then you can sell that to normies as just an identity fraud protection. And that's something that would be very valuable to normies. Like, absolutely.
Do you think that it's more likely to be Lightning that people onboard to first in, maybe the short to medium term here?
Yeah, if they're getting Bitcoin to transact with, absolutely. It's kind of just there's no identity fraud risk when you pay with Bitcoin. So that's, I think, a huge underappreciated incentive to pay with Bitcoin in the first world. As far as like people investing to like hold on to Bitcoin for a long term, I don't think that's ever going to make sense to just go straight to Lightning.
Well, here, let me kind of give you my argument then, because I kind of use Lightning as my way of, like, I don't use Cash App too much anymore. I tend to use SparkSwap more often, and I move my money around a little bit. But the idea is that when I want to take the money out, that I would do a submarine swap or a loop out transaction and just put it into a Bitcoin UTXO, every so often whenever it gets to be, a decent amount, a couple $100 at least. Do you think that there's any logic there, or is that just a really convoluted way of doing it?
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that now, but in the long term, that kind of comes back to like the issue of getting credit for a receiving channel and like that staying open. Like how much you can get would be like how many or how big your UTXOs would be. So that might cause fragmentation in the long term. But right now I don't see anything wrong with it. But in the long term, like we need we need channel factories and state chains and a lot of other potential things to really start thinking about cold storage on the second layer, because ultimately it's going to get to the point where doing that is going to get really expensive going on chain. So you need like I've played around with the idea in my head of like having a channel factory that's literally just cold storage. Like everybody gets into a channel factory, gets their withdrawal transactions, except here you would just have splice out transactions. And so you would just have like the fractal web of like everybody has what they need for every combination of like people splicing out in different orders. And then like that's it. Like you just set it up, you have the one set of transactions and you're done. Like until you want to go somewhere else, like you just hold on to your shit and you're okay. And that's the only thing that channel factory is used for, is just like a communal cold storage thing so that everybody can share one UTXO.
That's a very fascinating idea. I've never thought about the concept of second layer cold storage. Would that technically be cold at that point? Like, how would the key storage work? Maybe I'm not getting that part.
Well, I mean, yeah, because like the key storage, you can keep completely offline. All your withdrawal transactions offline, because the whole idea is the everybody does this one setup phase, and then everybody's set. Like everybody can just splice out if they want to without bothering anybody else. And everybody has the massive set of transactions so that they can still splice out for like all the possible who spliced out in what order. And so like there's no more need for interaction. So everything can just get set up and then be kept completely air gapped. And you could even potentially use hardware devices for this so that you don't even have the initial this is on a network computer problem.
I'm glad you brought that up. Along those same lines, a couple of years ago, all these second layer and even third layer things that we're kind of talking about more recently were kind of just complete pipe dreams. And in the next couple of years, do you think that we're going to think that we're in some insane place compared to now?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I if where my head sees like the Lightning Network going in the long term is accurate, it doesn't even make sense to call it the Lightning Network at the end of the road, because that whole thing is a pun on like the line that a payment takes, and it's like that's not what's going to be going on if we reach the end of where my head thinks we're going.
So, like, what call the entire thing Bitcoin?
I mean, in my head, I just call it layer two.
Ah,
Like that's it's just all just layer two.
I think I might be reaching my end here. Do you have any favorite Lightning app at all that you actually use or have used in the past?
I mean, it's all it's all just different. Like I wouldn't say I have any favorite. Like aside from like obviously I think Breeze is pretty stupid, but Lightning Labs wallet is okay. The only thing I don't like is that Neutrino isn't using a single node somewhere to define the valid chain. I do not like any wallet that just blindly follows proof of work. I would like that to change. Eclair is pretty nice. I'm actually really looking forward to what this Phoenix wallet they're rolling out looks nice. Electrum, I cannot wait for the official release of that to drop. Like that, I'm really psyched for. But like, it's not anything I would call favorites yet, because this, it's kind of like, what was your favorite wallet in 2014? Like all of them suck.
Pretty much.
Like I would argue most wallets today still suck.
Those are wallets, but do you have any favorite like user applications that stand out, or do none really stand out for you?
I mean, let's just say this lightning messaging thing that Used, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, is working on from Lightning Labs. I'll be watching it as it develops, but I think it's really stupid.
Okay, that's fair. I've definitely heard of people doing this. I think there's even one that came out more recently. There's that. There's the storm on layer 3 that Giacomo and Maxim are working on. Do you think that the idea is completely stupid in all its kind of iterations, or is it just that particular one?
I think it's stupid to limit the path that a message can take to get somewhere to the same restrictions that the actual payment channels have. Like I think that's the stupid part. Like if you want to have some kind of monetized encrypted chat thing, like I'm all for that. I just think like why on earth do you have like data you're passing around that is not subject to these liquidity constraints of Bitcoin and channels, and you're subjecting it to those constraints? Like it's why would you do that?
Do you think that there's any way to address that?
I mean, I couldn't lay out how to actually build it or how it would work, but I imagine there is some kind of fuckery you can do with the pre-image release and playing around who releases it and how that works. You might be able to have like a just send something encrypted through a more efficient hop, and then it only like can be decrypted if the payment's received or something like that. But I'd have to sit and think about that for a bit.
Okay, that's cool. Is there an app that you would love to create for the Lightning Network? Maybe future Lightning if you want to add in all the magical things we talked about earlier.
I want to see people sell drugs on the Lightning Network. That'd be pretty cool.
I would agree with that. Essentially, you're saying Lightning Network, darknet markets.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, why not? If you can get the bridges between Tor and the ClearNet incentivized, like, do it.
I don't disagree with you. I definitely like Silk Road when it was around. And it seemed like the future back then.
I'm sorry. Like, you just my head just went to the place where I can't stop rapidly thinking through a whole idea.
Go ahead.
But like lightning on the darknet. Like, think about it. If you have rendezvous routing and you have AMP, so that like there's even like a single thing is split around, and you have Schnorr signatures, so you can't even try to do statistical analysis. If you have a bunch of Sybil nodes on the network, then like really, how do you identify which UTXOs are the darknet market? Like, how do you ever take those payments funneling into them and use that to somehow find their coins on chain and flag those?
Do you think that there's any other way to do analysis on Lightning as to make it more probable that you could figure someone else out? Because I have no idea. I'm asking kind of as a genuine noob in that respect.
I know there was. I still have to read it. I haven't had the time to yet, but there is that exploit in the Sphinx protocol that's used for the onion routing. I think Rusty and Roast Beef were talking about it on Twitter. That might be something to look into. But as far as like really thinking through, the privacy properties of Lightning beyond the obvious stuff, like that's a bit out of my wheelhouse. Like that's over my head.
That's fair. How about we talk about your podcast really fast?
Oh well, it's not really just mine.
Sure.
I have like a spin-off called Shy 256 for my insane ramblings on my own. It's kind of just like a weekly news analysis show I do with my buddies Rick from Boulder, Janine Rome. Anybody who's paid attention to the Lightning conference might know her. She did the talk on journalism and Lightning Network, and then Nopara from Wasabi Wallet. And it's pretty much like we just have the weekly news analysis show. We go over all the big stuff, and then we try to have special editions where we interview guests as often as we can. But it's not as often as I wish we could.
Was there any recent episode that you remember really well and might be a good introduction to new listeners?
That's actually kind of been a constant thing in the back of my mind is unless you're deep enough in to make sense of the news, it's probably a little highbrow. I'm trying to kind of take the Shy 256 spinoff I'm doing by myself to an area that's more accessible to noobs, but like that's I think going to be a learning curve for me. because I'm not the best person to like simplify stuff to the exact right level that I can just make anybody understand what I'm talking about. So yeah, that might not be the best thing to come for or come to us for at this time.
That's fair, but let's talk more about your podcast a little bit because I find that interesting. I managed to not notice that. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about your Shy 256?
It's really just like, I kind of have the freest schedule out of everybody and always want to ramble about shit. So I just did that, but I'm trying to kind of find my way to a balance of like going over important stuff at a level that noobs can actually like draw something away from, and then just like me ranting about like whatever crazy shit I'm thinking about that week. Like it's like a buddy of mine put it to me as like Bitcoin futurism rants or something like that.
Honestly, I think that's been one of the best parts of this entire podcast, where you're kind of laying out the magical Bitcoin future.
I mean, it's like, it's just like my head naturally. I get something, I get the gist of it, and then my brain runs a million miles an hour forward as fast as it can. Like there's not a lot of that kind of stuff going on in the space beyond like insane nonsense trying to validate people scamming you, or like, just in little niches all over the place. Like everybody's always hyper focused on like what's right now, and it's like I want to see more people like kind of talk about and just think about the real long term, like what's actually going to happen in 10 years, not like not the next year, the next 5, or like what might possibly like play out in 10 years. Like what, like let's think through like what can we actually make happen 10 years from now.
Where do you see Bitcoin being in 20 years here?
In 20 years, it's either not going to exist or it is going to have eaten a large portion of the world in terms of the money people use. And it will probably be a wide spectrum of everything from completely trustless, decentralized second layers to just like private encrypted banks. And all of those things will just interoperate between each other.
All right. I really appreciate you joining me on the podcast. Do you want to let the listeners know about, how they can find you, your podcast, and then the other podcast that you happen to be on?
It's well, you can just find me at Brian_trolls with a Z instead of an S, and then you can find me and everybody else at Block Digest, and yeah, I mean it's really the only social media presence I have anywhere.
All right, man. I really appreciate you joining me on the podcast.
I appreciate you having me on, Chaz. This was really fun, actually.
Yeah, it was.
Probably going to be pining to come back and talk in a couple months or something.
All right, man. That sounds good. We can talk shit about Lightning more at that point. Boom. That's the 11th episode of the Lightning Junkies podcast in the can. What did you think? Did you learn anything? Was your mind expanded by this colorful exploration into Lightning Network darknet markets? Despite the trolley title, I really liked this episode. It was really well balanced and very conversational. It's almost guaranteed that Shinobi will return to the show in short order. Don't forget the simple ways that you can support this show. If you want to support the show with Bitcoin, chip in at my crowdfunding campaign, crowdfund.lightningjunkies.net. There are also various ways to tip that are linked in the show notes. Part 2 of 2 of the Skeptical of Lightning series will come out next Monday, so stay tuned for that. Please subscribe, rate, and smash that like button or whatever. For now, I will see you on the Lightning Network.